Hello once again, everyone, and this is going to be a special request by Carl Anderson, who wanted some advice on striking and stepping, and specifically the rhythm of that. So I'm joined by Bob. Basically, the question is, when you throw your strike, how should that be in relation to your step? So, what we certainly don't want to be doing is the following. We don't want to be stepping and striking, because of course the issue there is I bring myself into distance, and then my strike can only reach as far as this step, which has now been planted, allows it to do so. So if I'm out of range, I can't reach further without needing to take another step. So that's not optimal. I think we all know that. So instead, the biggest thing about it is you want your hands to go before your feet. How synchronous should they be? Basically the difference between making it hands foot or making it same time. And that may look like a relatively minor difference, but the reason that this can be a bit of a challenging thing to work through is because it's not necessarily intrinsic. So let's talk about it in a bit of detail. So as far as those two, if you were to replay them and look at them, the one I am recommending is the former, not the latter. Cutting purely synchronous, i.e. as long as the hands at least start moving a little bit before the feet, but otherwise you are hitting at the same time your foot lands, that's completely fine, especially when you're first starting out. Because it's really more about just making sure you're always moving at the time that you are striking with any given weapon. This also includes the idea of extending and lunging or cutting with a lunge or things along those lines, but I'll get back to that again in a second. So that is not a terrible thing at first, however it is limiting. And the reason it's limiting is because you will grow into the habit of syncing up your actions a bit too much. What I mean is, if I am always used to the hands start the motion, but I want to hit as my foot lands, so at the same time, your body's keeping count of how much time that takes. Meaning that when suddenly an opportunity presents itself to strike, you'll hold yourself back by trying to sync up your step with it, rather than just taking that moment of letting that cut go out and then letting the step be the thing that happens after. And I know this is the case because I see it and have to train it out of people all the time. Now, again, if you're first starting out, this isn't necessarily a huge problem, but it starts to become a problem when you're looking at more complex strikes, smaller timing windows, or especially when you're doing any sort of one-handed swordsmanship. So, here's what I mean. First off, when you're doing more complex strikes, let's look at something relatively well-known across traditions. Let's look at the Svarkal, right? Everybody knows the Svarkal. That's easy to pick it up. If I sync my steps up to it, the question becomes, when do you sync your step, right? So a Svarkal looks like this. I cut, and I'm striking against the temple as I spring out to the side. Well, should I start stepping now? That's going to bring me a lot closer to my target than I want. And if I hold it for the transition, that means I'm doing a hover step for quite a while, and that's not sustainable at higher speeds. Alternatively, should I wait until I'm here and then step? That's not necessarily terrible, the issue being then that my hands are very exposed and not locking in for a long time. Instead, what you're looking for is really to get those hands out into space, doing the strike, and then my step will follow it. It should feel the same as my normal cut, follow, same idea, cut, follow. Now, that takes a lot of practice because you have to get everything firing correctly, but it's not as hard as it seems. So for one, all you want to be thinking about when you're doing this sort of thing is throwing something. So, for example, let's say I had a ball. When I throw it, I'm not going to sync it up with my step. I'm not going to go, ha, I can, but it's not a very efficient throw. I'm certainly not going to step then throw it, right? Instead, what you're looking for, or what you would train for, is that activation of push. And the harder you push that hand, you will start naturally turning your hip. You then start using your hip with it. Now I'm drawing power from the ground to get more power. Then I put enough power into it that I feel obliged to step. That's about the rhythm you're looking for your cuts. You are putting enough activation from the stance that you are standing in, forward with your upper body, engaging with your core, and now that a range change is required, you let that foot follow. Which also, I can point out, does add to pressure when you are doing a cut rather than throwing something. But basically, that's the mentality you want to have. Cast those hands, that ball, that stone, that sword, out forward, and let yourself adjust range as needed, not necessarily in the after effect, but in the tailing effect of what that does. This does a couple things for us. Number one is, it ensures that any action you're doing is going the straightest, fastest possible route. Even something that, let's say, goes around my body. So, loading up impulse lead-on, for example. I still want it to be going as sheer as possible before that step is required. This also ensures that if anything goes wrong, my opponent falls back or what have you, right? I can adjust that step by adding more or less power off of my leg as I transition. This also has the benefit of desensitizing my movement. As far as my cut's concerned, the only modifications I'm going to make are the ones I determined to make from here. So what cut am I throwing? As far as my step is concerned, that's not linked to my cut. So if something goes wrong and I need to adjust trajectory, that's just choosing where I swing this foot. If I fall short or where I'm going to be too close, it's how much I push off or don't push off of this back leg, which again is not connected to the cut. This allows me to do everything I need to do by default, but also roll myself back or adjust on the fly. Because make no mistake, when you make a cut, that's it. That's the simple part. And it can't be influenced by anything else. But how that cut acts in space can be. For example, a fantastic over might work great at this range. But if suddenly we're closer, I don't have the room to make it such a fantastic over. But by instead letting the cut still be what it was going to be and adjusting with my lower body, not as a separate thing, but also as a separate stage, now I get to cut the same I normally did, my feet carry me to the optimal distance. And that's really the main benefit of cutting and then stepping, is that you get the ability to adjust what you need to do on the fly without needing to learn a bunch of different ways of cutting. I cut the same. My feet get me where I need to go. Now, the same is also going to be true in regards to thrusts or one-handed swordsmanship in general. Let's look at thrusts real quick with the long sword and then we'll go from there. So, you can't sync this up. If I try to, and we're going to go with the simplest possible thrust, right? Posta breve. So, if I extend, step, that's always got a slight nature of hands then feet. And that's good for me because that means in the moment of, my tip is out there and hitting target before my foot is required. And even if I am falling short, that's already stabbing ahead of that motion. Anything needs to change, I can adjust, etc. You don't want to, right? Doggedly lock it to yourself outside of very few situations. And that's where a lot of people really get stuck when they're trying to launch their thrusts. Cuts, a little more forgiving. Thrusts especially is the real teller. If you find that your thrusts never land as initial actions, probably you're waiting for your foot, when you should be just putting the sword into the hole and letting your foot do whatever it needs to do afterwards. That's also true in regards to pursuing things. This could be a knot racing, this could be other sorts of opportunities. There's a moment for me to fire my shot. So for example, one I end up commonly doing, what a lot of people in this school end up commonly doing, we cover above our head, there's the opportunity to strike. If I wait to sync this up with my foot, it slows me down. But if I'll let it be that sword first, and the foot just adjusts if it even needs to, now I'm hitting a lot faster in a smaller window because my hands are used to doing their own thing, my feet are used to supporting or not. Now one-handed swordsmanship gets a lot more of this because you can very easily adjust in and out. In fact, let me grab another weapon real quick. So, topically, for those of you that follow for the Napoleonic content, thinking about the slip. So, we've got our inside slip, outside slip, hanging slip, all that wonderful stuff. If I am married to my foot, so slip, ha, that may feel more powerful than a nice 1, 2, you'll never hit somebody. The reason for that is because they're going to lunge, you're going to dodge it, they're going to recover, and then they're too far away. The rhythm needs to be hand, foot, hand, foot. That ensures that you're striking much quicker when they're at their closest instead of waiting. This might not be a terrible thing for learning, but it won't work in execution. You need that out there as soon as possible in all of your slips. So, too long didn't breed, what's the sum up? When you strike, if you are first learning something, synchronization is not a terrible thing. When you start to look for opportunities of application, synchronization will hold you back. You should focus on the sword goes into the hole, your body follows it however it needs to. Am I in such a range that I can pass straight forward? Great, wonderful, then I can do that. Am I in such a range that I will need to pass out to the side? Great, wonderful, I can do that. And my sword first going out into space can serve as a range marker to help me determine that, sometimes even in the moment. The best way to practice it, like I showed, throw the stone. The more you focus on that activation and then you follow it with either foot forward, with whatever, the sooner you will be able to cultivate this. But otherwise, I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much, Bob. And we will be going over some other techniques another time.